Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the Seaman, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Seaman's Cinema Sit Down. If you've been following along, you know we just wrapped up our Last of Us Season 1 coverage, diving in and reacting to the making of the season, as well as touching on the things that we kind of missed or skimmed over about Episode 9. If you want to check that video out, you can certainly do it right up there. But now it's time to turn our attention to something different. And by different, I just mean a new season. I've played part 2 of the game. I know where the story ultimately goes on that front, and I have an idea of where we could go season 2, considering we're going to get multiple seasons, whether that'll be 2 or 3 seasons to tell this part of the story, yet to be seen or announced. What am I talking about? Why don't you pull up a chair, take a seat. We are getting ready to dive in spoiler-filled. The amount of spoilers for The Last of Us Part 2, which could play into Season 2, Season 3, Season 4, who knows? We're talking all the spoilers. Anything that comes after Season 1 of The Last of Us, you can guarantee is going to be a spoiler in this discussion, so you've been warned. But we are going to dive in spoiler-filled into how I think we're going to see Season 2 come together, and specifically 5 things that I expect to see in the season. As I said, there are major spoilers ahead, so if you have not played Part 2, and either you plan to play Part 2, or you just don't want spoilers until you see what happens in Season 2, and the seasons to come after that, I would highly suggest turning the video off, leaving, bookmarking it, coming back around later to be like, oh shit, Seaman nailed it. Or like he was very, very off. But I do have the upper hand of knowledge of the game, and considering how accurate Season 1 was, even with the differences, there are major spoilers ahead. So you have been warned. But I'm going to take what I know about Part 2, which, by the way, I've only played Part 2 one time. Game came out right at the top of the pandemic. I played it. It was fantastic. And then life took over, and I haven't had a chance to go back to it. So I'm not going to dive into too many super details or finite things that could be specific to Season 2, but the general big picture story that is going to be coming for both Ellie and Joel is what I want to dive into, and how they could break that up into a few seasons. So we're just going to start with the first thing that I expect to see. And when, Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin say that they're not going to adapt it identically and that they are going to change things, and I think what they're talking about is exactly what they did with Season 1, right? Where you adapt and you change things from a narrative standpoint if it's going to enhance the story in some way, right? Or make it better than what Neil gave us in the video game world. And for me, in Season 1, every time they did one of those things, it did just that. And I would expect the same to continue. And I've said from jump that I think you could do an entire season that takes place between Part 1 and Part 2. And maybe Mazin and Druckmann do that. However, if they are going to just tackle Part 2 and that story and extend it for several seasons, I think one way you could kind of address the 4 years in between the story would be to use the flashbacks from the game. As you play throughout the course of the game, Ellie runs into certain things that create memories for her. And you'll get these flashback moments to different time periods or places that her and Joel go in between Part 1 and Part 2. Some of those she's much younger, some of those she's closer to the age that she is in Part 2. And that's the wonderful flexibility of Bella, is Bella Ramsey being the age already that she would need to be for Part 2 has shown us that she can play down in age. So I think if you just keep the long hair and she plays the character the way she plays the character in Season 1, you could do any flashbacks you want that could be close to when they get back to Jackson. And you could also do flashbacks that are closer to where Part 2's story is going. And I think the big difference there will be the tattoo she'll have on her arm to cover the bite, and the shorter hair. And like I said, I had finally, for the first time, seen someone like mock up an image, and I was like, oh shit, yeah, there it is. And especially after we see what Ellie goes through in Episode 8, Bella, I think, has proven that she's going to be able to handle all this stuff. But what's nice is that being where she is, she can kind of play to both places. So you could utilize the many different types of flashbacks that we run into throughout the course of the video game. One that specifically sticks out in my head is I believe they get to like a museum of modern history or science or something like that, and they get to like a wing in that museum that's kind of space driven. and Ellie puts on a space helmet and does like a fake blast off in like like one of those like rocket replicas or whatever it is somewhere in that general area. And it's a moment for me that kind of is reminiscent to the video game version of her and Riley playing the video game, right? Where Riley is kind of telling her what to think and expect. And it's kind of a similar situation as they kind of pretend like they're blasting off. So that's one, like if I was going to pick one of the flashbacks that I definitely hope to see in season 2, that would be one of them. But like I said, I think you're going to be able to tell in those first couple episodes things that happen in between, right? And like I said, I think you'll see some of those flashbacks as well as the moment where the fallout actually happens. Everything from season 2 forward and from part 2 forward in the video game world is technically built on a lie, right? Joel promises Ellie that everything he said was true. And we know that that's not the case. He's the one that killed everybody there to just specifically save Ellie. And while Ellie knows that, we see it in her face in the video game, and Bella nails it in the live action, where she literally digests. You see the idea come into her head, and she's like, all right, Joel just lied to me. Or I think Joel's been lying. I'm going to ask him. Now he has. He's chosen to go with the lie. I know this. I can't deal with it right now. Push it down. Reset. All right, let's go forward. And that's where Ellie is in that moment, right? It's too much to deal with Joel taking away the meaning of her life. And, you know, from Joel's perspective, I think Ellie's life has lots of meaning being alive. And that's something that Ellie doesn't want to deal with at all. And she's going to just go along with what Joel said was true until she has to face it. And that's one of the things that does eventually happen in the game, is that you see there's a huge rift between Joel and Ellie. That relationship kind of falls out once that is addressed head on. And it's one of these things where the video game, playing as Joel as much as you do, when you get into part 2, you know, you've spent so much time with these characters that I think it's easily earned to go the route that they do in the game. I think you got to earn a little bit more before we can, you know, we spent a whole season getting these two together. We can't immediately rip them back apart. So I think you'll kind of see a build, but one of the things I would also expect in that back kind of storytelling is seeing that moment where Joel has to admit that he lied to Ellie, and kind of addressing that head on when Ellie is in a headspace where she can address it head on. So that's certainly one thing, or one of several things that I would expect in season 2. The other thing that, again, will kind of be like a split two-parter, is that I expect there to be a bunch of story around Ellie and Dina specifically, but also their friend group, as well as Joel and Tommy. I think one of the things we'll see in early episodes in season 2 is seeing what a lot of normal life looks like in Jackson. So whether that's going on patrol or, you know, working somewhere inside the town, I think you're going to see an expansion on Joel and Tommy's relationship, as well as Ellie inside of the community, and specifically teeing up the eventual relationship that we'll see with Dina. I would expect that would come to a head near the back part of season 2, where we would kind of come in exactly like we do in the game, where you're having this big dance in the like cafeteria hall that they had in the season. That was a very, very well made replica of kind of what that shot looks like in the game. And I think you'll see your first romantic interaction between Ellie and Dina. That's something I would expect season 2 to explore, and explore in a much more detailed way. Like, that's one of those spots where you can really see an expansion where you kind of get to know Ellie's friends a little bit. Maybe you go on patrols with them. One of the things that Mason and Druckmann have both said, and this is where I think they're very in touch with the fan base, and I think you can already see, like, no, granted, nothing is live there, but when you see Druckmann tweet, or when you're seeing them in interviews now, like, I think that they're hearing things that people put in there. And look, when you have one opportunity to tell a story completely, I think you got to do it. And that's what they did with season 1. They didn't know they were going to get a season 2. And you got to cut a lot of the gameplay out to get to the root of the story and create this really, really phenomenal narrative. I expect that going forward, but I also think, like they've said, you'll see more zombies. I think there will be some more action, and you can bake that into Ellie and her group that she kind of hangs out with in Jackson. Whether it's them on patrols, running in directly with, you know, different hunters or raiders, or, you know, different zombies. I think that's stuff that you'll see, and like I said, within that, you'll kind of see Ellie and Dina's relationship starting to kind of take shape in a better build-up to then, like, it not being something where it's like, oh man, we just met this person, like, oh cool, that's Ellie's love interest. Like, I think you'll see a nice natural building there with those characters, and I would expect a lot more for Joel and Tommy. I think we'll see Joel kind of come to terms a little bit more with, his loss and accepting Sarah's death and Ellie, not as like a replacement, but like kind of like his pseudo daughter now. And, it's one of those things that I think will help Joel kind of dissect that, but that's something that I would expect him and Tommy to talk about. And maybe finally that picture that we never saw come back to Joel of him and Sarah, maybe that's something where we finally get to see Tommy try to give it to him, and in this state of mind, Joel would just accept it. But I do think that we'll see a bunch of expansion on that relationship as well as his relationship with Ellie, right? Like, you're gonna see more from those relationships, and then, like I said, Ellie and Joel building themselves inside of the community of Jackson. I can see a lot of those early episodes covering those things, which kind of leads right into the third thing that I was starting to already talk about, but that's more zombies and I think slower storytelling in general. When you look at, hey, we got one season to do The Last of Us. If every video gamer has dreamed about that game coming to live action, let's do it all, right? Like, if you got to cut down on gameplay moments, like, then there are arguments for things like episode 3 where, yeah, it sucked that we didn't get the moment where Joel gets hung upside down and is firing off at zombies that are trying to come in as Ellie's trying to cut, the cord on the refrigerator that's kind of acting as the anchor. Like, that's a moment that you could have worked into episode 3 in some way just to give us that experience, and that's something where I understand why you strip stuff like that out in season 1 to get through that whole story in 9 episodes. But now that you've got the fan base, you've got the viewership numbers, you've got the money and the backing from HBO for multiple seasons, you can slow things down, and I think you can give us more of those moments. I would not be shocked if in an episode where maybe we're expanding on story, we get a moment where Joel gets caught like that or Ellie gets caught like that. Like, I could see recreations of action moments more so in this season than in this past one, because you're getting the whole story in one season. And this story, while it's longer and it's bigger and would deserve more seasons on its own, the fact that they didn't say 2, they said multiple. We could get 2, maybe 3 more seasons of The Last of Us. And if you're doing that, great way to fill in time in the storytelling. If you're going to do what I think they're going to do for season 2, then yeah, you can load in more zombies. Introduce us to some of the other human factions out there, which is something that I think they're going to do anyway when you get to the next thing that we'll talk about. But it's one of those where I think the genius of stripping stuff out can become a wonderful opportunity to add some of that stuff back in for a story that now we can slow down and kind of extend and take our time in telling a little bit more. One of the other things I think that'll be fascinating too when you're talking about more zombies is the inclusion of spores. Mazin and Druckmann have already hinted that spores could be included in season 2 or in future seasons, and I'll be fascinated to see how they handle that or how that works. In a world where this has been going on for 20 years, spores popping up out of nowhere would be kind of surprising. So how they handle that piece of storytelling and how they work the infection and the infected, I think, more into the story is something else that we'll see in season 2. But now we get into like the real big spoilery kind of things, where I think one of the other main things that'll have to happen, and I think will happen earlier than it does in the video game, is we have to be introduced to Abby. Abby is a massive character in part 2. She basically takes up about half the storytelling. And that's because Neil Druckmann does this unbelievable thing when it comes to the storytelling. It's one of the reasons why I think part 2 is even better writing than part 1, because you are introduced to a character that you have a hatred for. And then Druckmann forces you to play out a piece of that character's story, where you start to understand their motivations, the things they're doing. Stuff that he did with Mazin in season 1 with the hunters, right? Like, when you look at what they did trying humanizing them. Druckmann does that in part 2 with Abby's character. And it's one of the biggest, like, magic tricks I've ever seen in writing, where it's like, you hate this character, and then you have to live and understand who this character is because you have to play as her. And it completely brings you around to the character that when you were presented with what happens at the end of the game, you don't really know how to feel. And it's very similar to the kind of concept, well, not necessarily similar to the kind of concept, but the emotional concept at the end of season 1 and part 1, where it's like, Joel could have saved the world or saved this girl. What's the right decision? And you're confronted with a similar option for Ellie's character at the end of part 2, where it's like, you could do one of two things. And prior to certain things, yeah, you would 100% kill the person. But in a different scenario, you wouldn't. And that's because Abby is our main antagonist. And there's a lot of spoilers coming here, folks. But Abby's story is fascinating, and it's one that I'm really excited to see with how they play in season 2, because I think it would be worthwhile to bring her in earlier, right? Show that faction, show some of the stuff that they're doing that you don't see in the game that builds up to the biggest moment and what I assume would be the end of season 2. Brace yourselves if you don't know. But about a third of the way through the game, Joel gets kidnapped and held hostage and beaten pretty badly trying to get information out. And it looks really grim. And this character, Abby, is the leader of all of this. She's got some sort of gripe with Joel, and she is dead set on killing him. And as you're getting close to that moment, you're thrown back into Ellie's shoes where you're like, here we go, hero time, Ellie's going to come save the day. And instead, Ellie comes in, and I don't know, this is where it's been a while since I played it, but like she either takes down one person or gets a little bit of attacking in, but the room's got a bunch of people, so she gets jumped. I think she gets knocked out, and when she comes to, she is pinned on the ground face to face with Joel, who is on the ground and beaten to within an inch of his life. Abby decimates him with a golf club. And when she finally feels that she's gotten everything that she's needed to finish off her piece of revenge storytelling, she kills Joel with a golf club right in front of Ellie. And that is where I would expect season 2 to end. If I was Druckmann and Mazin, I would expand on, like I said, stuff that happened in between the two games. I would expand on the world of Jackson. I would expand on Abby's story. Let us meet her people. Build up to episode 8, her kidnapping Joel. And then episode 9, if you do it in the same format as season 1, would be her killing Joel. And there's several ways you could go. You could take it from that death and take it a little bit more forward to where Ellie gets saved, rescued, and kind of has to deal with everything. There's a really touching sequence with Dina that I could see them doing. But I also think it would kind of be genius to just end on the golf club hitting Joel. Could you imagine your audience who doesn't know this stuff that we're talking about sitting there going, did they just kill Joel? And the credits start, and you're like, because back in the day, network television was huge for this, and HBO used to do it too, but I think HBO would finish out their seasons a little bit more. You'd see it kind of with like Thrones or different, but network television did this all the time. Cliffhangers were huge, going into sweeps, going into breaks. You would have something that just left you sitting there for months going, how do I not know what happened? And I feel like I haven't seen that in television in a while. You want to talk about a pop culture moment? If season 2 ended on that golf club swing and the audience is just left for however many months or it takes to get to season 3 just thinking about whether or not Joel is actually dead, whoo, that is a hook that gets you to come back for season 3, right? But that if I'm those guys, that's where I end season 2. I build up the stuff that's in between the games, the world that Ellie is in, introduce us to Abby and that world a little bit, more of the factions, the other things that are going on in the world, and build to this place where you just see this antagonist in Abby, and she does exactly what the antagonist is supposed to do, rip your hearts out. And that will make the impact of that story so much stronger going into seasons 3, 4, however many you want to do. Because, like I said, it's about the swing, and this is where the following seasons, we're going to be a little spoiler talky too, where if you can set yourself up to get to there, two things. One, I think the audience needs more time with Joel and Ellie because you didn't live as them, right? You're not quite on the same level connection-wise as the audience that played them in the video games. So to kill Joel that quickly, I don't think would play well with the audience. The other thing, you have Pedro Pascal. Why would you want to lose him 2-3 episodes into the season? I think it would make a lot more sense to extend him through to the end of season 2, and then you can always utilize him for flashbacks or small moments like you do in the video game in any seasons going forward. But I don't think you can take that character off the board too early, and that's why I would end the season there. And now when you're going into the stuff that's not Joel's story, you're giving the audience time to digest that, because trust me, other video game people that I've talked to, people that I've seen on the internets, and myself, when you get to that moment in the game, you've been waiting almost 7 years to play with these characters again, and Joel's taken off the board like that. I literally put the game down for like a day. I couldn't go back to it. I had to like deal with that shit before I could come back and play. I think if you give the audience an entire layoff to deal with that shit, when you come back in and present them with what you're going to do with the story going forward, I think it'll work more. And it's all about the perspective. The thing that I don't want to see in season 2 is the reveal of why Abby wants to kill Ellie and Joel. Because, spoilers, here it comes. This is the second big one. Abby's dad is the doctor that Joel kills. So Abby's dad, about to save the entire world. Flip your perspective around and put it in Abby's shoes. Her dad's going to save the whole world. Some crazy lunatic comes in, kills an entire hospital full of people to save this little girl and take her out. I would so be ready to hunt these two down. And that's the magic trick of part 2, is that forcing you to play as Abby brings you into that story. And it takes you a while to be okay playing with Abby. But when you get that story, you're suddenly confronted with something where it's like, now I have reason to like this character. And there's an entire storyline with a little boy and her that I think could be very present in season 3 that really connects you with this character, that when you flip it back over to Ellie's part of the story, which is now what Abby's part of the story was, and that's that revenge drive. You go on this journey with Ellie where you want to kill Abby so bad, but after you are forced to spend time with Abby and you get to Ellie finally having that moment to get her revenge, I didn't want her to do it. And that's the genius of the storytelling, is it conflicts you in a way where it's like, are you riding with Ellie to kill her? Or are you hoping that Ellie can save her own humanity and not kill her? Because it's one of these, like, if these two could just sit down and talk, there'd be no reason to kill anybody. And exploring that in season 3, and I would love kind of into a season 4, right? Where you can come into season 3 and literally start the season with Abby's story. Make your audience kind of get frustrated, like, what, we're back with this bitch? Like, and then make them live that, where it's like, oh shit, I now feel a different way. And then if you were to bring in Ellie's revenge story on the back end of the season, or even into a season 4, suddenly riding through that story has a totally different feel and vibe. And that's what makes the writing of Neil Druckmann so much fun to play with on the television side, because you deal with these things that are just, they're tough, man. And he makes you confront them and takes them in really interesting ways, and I can't wait to see how Mazin plays with those concepts. But like I said, I would save that reveal. Do not let the audience know that Abby's dad is the doctor until after she kills him. I think you need to kind of follow some of that formula to really make that effective storytelling connect, and that's why I would break it up. End season 2 with that death, and then season 3 start exploring what that means for Abby and Ellie. And you can really do some really fascinating storytelling stuff, and it's just the things that get me excited. So those would be the 5 things that I would be looking for, right? Fill in stuff from the gap in between the story, right, with flashbacks. Maybe just tell them in present and kind of chronologically move the story. But however you want to deal with that, you're going to deal with Ellie and Joel becoming a father and daughter to Ellie and Joel falling out. I need to see those. I also need to see Ellie and Dina's relationship starting to grow and blossom, and kind of see that brought about. But also her friend group. Let's see them on patrols. Bring in more zombies. Do the same with Joel and Tommy. Let's go on some patrols with them. Let's dive into that relationship more. Take our time to kind of dissect these characters a little bit more and get to spend more time specifically with Joel. Then, like I said, more zombies, slightly slower storytelling. We can break it out a little bit because we've got the support and the base that you need to have the comfort of like, okay, we have more time. Let's tell the story exactly how we want to tell it. And that's all I really want from these two guys. I want to make sure that we meet Abby, but don't give away what her big story piece is. And then, like I said, I think Abby will end up killing Joel in season 2. And it'll be crazy to see how audiences deal with that. I think the last thing I would say is I'll be really interested to see who they cast as Abby. I've seen a lot of people, throw out different ideas. I'm not really sure because I'm terrible when it comes to that stuff. But what I want, there were a lot of people who threw transgender stuff around Abby's character when the game came out because she doesn't really have feminine features. You know, she's got a lot of masculine features. She's very, very strong. She's a brolic kind of woman, but she's not a transgender character. Nothing in the game hints at that. Nothing that I've seen or played makes me think that, and I don't think that they'll go this route, but if somehow like somebody in casting got that idea in their head, that's not the route I would go. However, I would find a bodybuilder or a CrossFit. Like, there are so many women that are just, no matter what their sexuality is, like, that are just really strong, much larger women than myself. And I think that's a community that doesn't get to see themselves on screen very much. And Abby is a character that you could do that with, man. Get me just a brolic woman to play Allie, man. Like, you want to be fit, like, as a man, I want to be physically scared of Abby. And then that story becomes so fascinating with how you can humanize that character and strip away some of that stuff. So I'll be really interested to see where they go with the casting, but I would want a more physically imposing woman. I think that would really, really be beneficial and really sink in to a place where, like, you can really hate this woman, and then you can get into additional seasons where you feel she could be very much like a Jaime Lannister, in a completely different way. Like, you could have this character be someone who you come back around to, and, like, I'll be fascinated to see that happen with the audience. But yeah, for season 2, I think those are the 5 things that you got to hit. I hope that the storytelling after Joel's death happens after season 2, and you can kind of save and make the audience sit and deal with some of the stuff that I know video game players, especially early on in the pandemic, you had to walk away from some of it and deal with it before you could come back to it. So I'll be really fascinated to see where they go, but based on what I've seen in season 1, what I know about the story in part 2, I think those are kind of the main beats and things that I'd like to see in season 2. So I'm going to shut up. I'm going to turn it over to you guys. I'm sure some of you video game players have played part 2 more than once, have probably played it recently, and you might have some even better ideas of more specific things that could pop up in season 2. I will get into specifics when we're actually watching season 2, because I'll have replayed the game by then, but off of the main topics, what do you think is working? What things would you add into a season 2? And do you think that ending the season with Joel's death would be the right move? Or would you bring that in earlier? Or would you save it till maybe after season 2? It's one of those things where if they decide to do like a season of story, I can see them do a season of storytelling that doesn't get you to that and save that story for season 3. But if you're going to dive right into part 2, that's what I think is going to happen. What do you think? Anything you got, good, bad, indifferent, on my ideas and any of your ideas on what could be coming in Season 2 for The Last of Us, put it down below in the comment section. I look forward to talking to you down there. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're new, you want to come hang out with the C-Man anytime we're talking movies, TV, trailer, reactions, you want to be here in like a year to see if any of these theories are correct, you want to just see what I got, whether it be Mando coverage, different superhero coverage. I don't even know what's coming. I just know that John Wick is this week, and I can't wait. So if you want to be here for any of that coverage, you just like the old vibe of the C-Man and want to show a little love and support, well, hey, come join C-Maniac Nation. It's super easy. You just got to jump over there, hit that subscribe button, hit that little bell if you want those alerts, and until next time for the C-Mans, Cinema Sit Down. I've been the C-Man. I'm signing off. Peace. Oh, you guys are still here. You snuck up on me. You must be looking for more of this guy. Well, I got 2 video options for you, man. Right up here and right over here. And if you want all those C-Man goodies, well, hey, come join the squad right on over there, and I'll catch you on the next one.